What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the pros and cons of living in Sandy Springs, Georgia. One of the biggest pros of living in Sandy Springs and one of the biggest draws to why so many people move to Sandy Springs is that it's so close to the city of Atlanta. Sandy Springs is very much like an extension of the city of Atlanta. Much of the city feels very similar to Atlanta, it looks similar to Atlanta, has a very similar vibe to the city of Atlanta. So Sandy Springs is kind of outside of the city of Atlanta. It's just north of the city of Atlanta, a little closer to the suburbs, but it's so close. So especially for the people who want to live outside of the city of Atlanta, but work in the city of Atlanta, Sandy Springs is a great option and provides a very short commute to the city of Atlanta. Another benefit of living in Sandy Springs is the amount of character and charm that you can find in the homes there. Of course, if you're thinking about moving to Sandy Springs or any of the cities around Atlanta, feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. Thank you so much to everyone who has reached out. I'm always happy to help. But yeah, the style that you can find in the homes there in Sandy Springs is really one of the biggest draws to people who live there. Many of the homes in Sandy Springs were built in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and this all has to do with its proximity to the city of Atlanta. Because it's so close, it was more developed, during that time period, during the 50s and 60s, and some of the style and the character that you find in the homes built during that time is just not something that we see very often anymore. And for many people, they don't want to live in an area where all of the houses look exactly the same, or you live in a neighborhood where all of the homes were just built, but every single house looks exactly the same. For many people, they want homes that look unique and look different from their neighbors. And this is certainly something that you can find in Sandy Springs. The main road that you would take to get to Atlanta from Sandy Springs is Highway 400, but there are many other roads that would get you to Atlanta from Sandy Springs because it's so close to Atlanta. Highway 9 and Lake Forest Drive also go north and south from Sandy Springs to the city of Atlanta. So not only is it a short commute for work, but there's also plenty of options to get there. So traffic-wise, you're not really dealing with a lot of congestion to get to Atlanta from Sandy Springs. And this is definitely one of the biggest draws for people who live in Sandy Springs. Another pro of living in Sandy Springs is that it has that big city feel and it has the suburban feel. Sandy Springs, more than any other city around Metro Atlanta, is the best mix of big city and suburban feel. And that's because of where it's located. It's just outside of Atlanta, close to the suburbs, so it's kind of has that perfect mix. The southern part of Sandy Springs feels like Atlanta, and the northern part of Sandy Springs feels like the suburbs. So this is a big reason why a lot of people want to live there. If you want to be in the middle of all the action and you want to have plenty of things to do and the ability to get to the city of Atlanta very easily, then you can be on the southern part of Sandy Springs and have all those things. But if you're wanting to be in a more suburban area where it's a bit quieter, then you can be in the northern part. And you can really have the best of both worlds in Sandy Springs. And then speaking of things to do in Sandy Springs, that's certainly another pro of living there. There really is no end of things to do there in Sandy Springs. We have downtown Sandy Springs, which is a great place to hang out and spend time. They also have one of those big green lawn areas where people like to picnic or throw the ball or hang out. And then they also have the Chattahoochee River, which goes right along the southern border of Sandy Springs. This provides lots of outdoor activities for people who live around there. Fishing, boating, hiking. There are lots of playgrounds and parks along the Chattahoochee River. And then just west of Sandy Springs is the Battery, which is in Cobb County. This is where the Atlanta Braves play. And again, there's a bunch of shopping around there as well and a bunch of restaurants. So super close to Sandy Springs. Okay, now let's talk about the downsides of living in Sandy Springs. One of the biggest downsides is that the home values there in Sandy Springs are one of the highest in all of Metro Atlanta. The average home value in Sandy Springs is about 750,000. And so there are plenty of other suburbs where you can get more home for your money, but if you absolutely want to be in Sandy Springs and be super close to the city of Atlanta, then that might be a great value for you. But the average home value there in Sandy Springs is certainly one of the highest in all of Metro Atlanta. In addition to that, another con about living in Sandy Springs is that it's one of the most populated cities in all of Metro Atlanta. So there can be a lot of congestion there. The rush hour traffic, again, is easy to get to Atlanta because there are so many routes to get there, but getting around town in Sandy Springs can sometimes be kind of difficult because of the amount of people that there are there. So the congestion in the roads is very common within the city there, and especially like in lines at the grocery store, or if you're trying to go to a park and maybe find parking in different places, like that kind of congestion is very common in Sandy Springs because of how many people live there. And then certainly another con of living in Sandy Springs is that the public schools there in Sandy Springs are just not good at all. I would definitely not recommend Sandy Springs if you have a young child and you're wanting to be in a school district that's like a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. Sandy Springs does not have that. You could, of course, have your child or your student go to a private school, but the public school system in Sandy Springs is just not very good. Really, the most common demographic that lives in Sandy Springs are people who don't have kids, maybe they're empty nesters, or young professionals who don't have kids and are just trying to be very close to the city of Atlanta. So yeah, the public schools in Sandy Springs are definitely not good. And then another con of living in Sandy Springs is that while the character of the homes are good and they have a lot of charm and they have a lot of uniqueness, they are also on the older side. There's not a lot of new construction, if at all, in Sandy Springs. So you're going to see a lot of homes with deferred maintenance in Sandy Springs. You're going to see a lot of homes that are not modernized in Sandy Springs. You know, a lot of homes with carports instead of garages in Sandy Springs. So if having a home that is newer and more modern is important to you, then Sandy Springs might not be the right one. And then another con of living in Sandy Springs is that it is so close to Atlanta. For some people, they don't want to be right there next to the city. They want to be out much farther away from the city of Atlanta. And Sandy Springs is so close that it has that similar kind of urban feel, that inner city feel that's very busy. And so if you're wanting to be far from the city of Atlanta, Sandy Springs doesn't really fit the bill. This is a much busier city and there's a lot of people who live there. It's not a quiet suburban town. So certainly something to think about if you're thinking about moving to Sandy Springs. Of course, if you want to see more about the city of Sandy Springs, check out this video where I go on a tour of the city. I'll see you there.